All right, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday and welcome to the Financial Town Hall. I just want to go through a few housekeeping items and then I'm going to turn it over for the Chancellor to make some introductory remarks before we get started. We'll have 1 hour together today. This session is being recorded. Interim CFO Kurt Schnier is going to present for about 30 minutes-ish, and then we are going to open it up for Q&A. Thank you for some of your pre-submitted questions. We will try to get to those first, and then I'll moderate and try to pepper whatever you all submit into the Q&A feature throughout your pre-submitted questions. Just a few housekeeping issues. Being recorded. Chat is not enabled, so please just use the Q&A feature. And we will try to develop and add to our broad FAQs that are on the DFA website around some of these financial questions. And so we'll add to that FAQ from the questions we get today. And then this recording will be posted on the Public Relations website, so you have access to that after today's session. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Chancellor for some remarks, and then we will get started.
Thank you, Dr. Putney, and thank you all, the 245 of our colleagues who are joining us this morning. I just wanted to thank Dr. Schnier and his team for the presentation that they've helped put together, which reflects not only their thoughts and deliberations, but also the insights and inputs of others across the campus. This is part of our ongoing commitment to bring the financial circumstances of the institution to the awareness of the campus, the entire campus, and our commitment to ensure that there is transparency around the resources that we have and how we deploy them in the interest of our students, our faculty, and our staff, and our mission at UC Merced. So I'm just very thrilled that we can continue this conversation. There will be always opportunities to improve on what we present, but I do want to recognize Dr. Schnier and his team, but again, mention that this is also reflecting the insights and opinions and contributions of many across campus as we work toward a greater financial foundation for the institution in order for it to achieve all of its greatest possible ambitions for our students, our faculty, our staff, and their families, and our broader community. So I want to thank all of you who have taken time this morning, now 286, to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor. Kurt, do you want to go ahead and get started? And you're on mute.
Thank you. Apologize for that. Thank you, Chancellor, and thank you, Luanna. And thank you all for joining us. This is the second of 4 campus town halls that we'll be hosting on fiscal responsibility. The purpose of these town halls is to really increase fiscal transparency for the campus and to engage you in the discussions we've been having about our campus finances moving forward. In today's presentation, we're going to review the feedback that was provided in the prior town hall survey. And we're also going to review some of the stimulus funding that we received for the campus at our current status. We received funds both from the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which is CARES, as well as recently the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, which is the CRRSAA. After that, we're going to provide some information about the campus fiscal conservation measures, where we are to date on those status. And we're going to talk about our future direction for the finances of the campus and some considerations moving forward. At the end of this presentation, we'll provide some information about the upcoming town halls that we have, as well as provide an opportunity for questions. So to start with our town hall, we sent survey following the town hall on December 4th to 1,880 faculty and staff. We received 671 responses, which was a 36% response rate, and we greatly appreciate everybody's feedback that was provided. There were 4 primary feedback request areas we looked at that I want to highlight in our discussion today. One of them focuses on the proposed salary and time reduction program that we were considering back in December. Another one is the communications that you as faculty and staff are desiring for increased fiscal transparency. Third one are some of the current cost saving measures we're taking to support the campus. and also some thoughts about what we might be able to do moving forward to increase our cost-saving measures. To start with, though, I'd like to highlight that the general feedback we received from all the faculty and staff who submitted responses was that Model 3 was the model that the campus preferred the most over the three that were looked at. 54% of you actually recommended Model 3 over the others. What was unique about that model is it had the highest protection for low-income earners. 2/7 of our income distribution, the lower side of the distribution, were completely protected from any salary and time reduction program. What I'd like to do now is highlight some of the responses that we received from 4 of the open-ended questions that were received from the survey. The first of these questions was really on the model feedback, general feedback that we received from you on the open-ended questions. One of the feedbacks we received, these are in priority of sort of from highest to lowest ranks, is you would like to see a more graduated program where there is increased financial costs on those that are in administration, as well as those in higher pay scales. There's also a general sentiment that you would prefer for us to cut expenses and not payroll. There's encouragement for the campus to consider voluntary separation programs, as well as time reduction programs. And above all, there was a concern to make sure that any program we use considers equity and fairness. Lastly, there was concerns raised to ensure that whatever program we do use moving forward, it's aligned with our current financial situation. To provide a little more information about the feedback we received, we've indicated a word cloud. Within the word cloud, basically what you will see is that the size of the word reflects the frequency with which it's used in the response. The largest word you'll see is model. This is really referring directly to the comments people made about the different models. The next would be salary. If you look into the responses we received, it is generally coming from the desire for faculty and staff to protect salaries as much as possible. This is also true for the word employee that was used throughout here. There's a general sentiment to maintain and protect our employees on the campus. The next question we want to look at is, what information would you like to see? What would help with fiscal transparency for our campus on a routine basis? Sort of a two-part question here. There was a list of items, and you had to say yes or no if you preferred to have that information present, and also some open-ended remarks that could be made. There were 5 primary responses. The latter 3 relate directly to the yes or no questions that I'll talk to at the end. The top 2 relate to a general desire for us to be very transparent about the strategies we're taking to ensure the long-run sustainability of the campus. And there was also a desire for us to provide historical financial information. Looking at the questions that were yes, no, 77% of you were interested in seeing current hiring decisions and where they reside across the campus. 78% were interested in looking at our current revenues and deficits. And 77% were interested in our current expenditures. In the slides that we were going down below, we'll actually provide more information precisely on those questions. Looking at the word cloud for this, we see campus. That shows up quite prominently. And this is the desire to understand all campus level financial information. This is relating to salary, savings, budgets, positions we have, really an increased desire for transparency. And we hope that these town halls and other opportunities we have will enhance that. Third question we'd like to look at is the current cost saving that we're doing. What we heard from all the faculty and staff who responded was that a lot of you are already taking on a lot of extra work to reduce additional payroll expenses. And you see that as a cost saving measure for the campus. Many of you are also paying for your own work-related expenses. This is your utilities, your supplies, your equipment, and that's saving the campus money. Also, as a campus, we're not traveling as much. We're not using services, entertainment, subscriptions, and memberships, and those are saving money. In fact, actually, some of the larger savings that we do see on our campus materialize in that area. This is also true for the campus utilities that we're saving. And one thing that came up across many comments with talking about the current cost saving measures is that a lot of you are foregoing merit pay, equity increases, reclassifications, stipends, and star awards. And that is a cost savings measure for the campus. Now, to go into the word cloud for this question, what we can see here is the word working. This really reflects the fact that many faculty and staff feel they're taking on a lot of extra responsibilities to support the campus cost saving measures. They're also reducing the costs on offices and supplies, purchases and travel. There's a general sentiment that a lot of the campus is feeling as if we're working harder to help save costs for the campus. Now, the fourth question we'd like to go over is what are the things we can do moving forward to consider cost-saving measures? The top 5 things were cited for the campus were to reduce the number and salary of administrators. There's also a discussion of using fewer and cheaper consultants, a recommendation to hire fewer managers and more line staff to do work, and to continue to defer backfills and hires for the campus to protect more employees that we have today. And the last one was to delay capital projects. Now, if we look at the word cloud, these are all the areas that people recommended reducing the cost that we have right now. This is with employment, hiring, staff, expenditures we have across the campus. In essence, it was a lot of continuing to do the same things we're doing, but at a different level. What I'd like to be able to do before we go into the next piece of this presentation is see if there are any questions that you'd like for me to answer. Luanna? I'll wait the proverbial 8 seconds.
Thank you. Okay, so let's see. We have a few questions. You're pausing here and waiting for folks that have questions related to this section, yes?
Yes. Yes.
So one question is, will UC Merced be taking advantage of any of the additional $500 million in working capital that was approved for borrowing at the January Regents?
The January Regents, we have not discussed that yet. I'm hoping that we will have the potential. We haven't looked at borrowing more money than we have borrowed beyond from the fall at this juncture. We have a $100 million loan that we got in the fall. We have not gotten additional loans from OP yet.
Okay. Let's see. We have a few questions that that I've already answered. One question is, do we have a plan to have faculty retirement incentive program?
I might ask to defer to you on Luanna, but my understanding is we've not actually implemented that program at this time, right? But
No.
I'll defer to you on that question. Yeah.
We haven't, and I would have to dig a little bit deeper to see if that's even being considered right now. Career development, there was a question around cost savings on career development. My department will not spend on career development due to budget constraints. Is there a way we can request for a budget for this? It's a really good question and something, Kurt, I don't know in your circles if you've had discussions around this, but I know we have in other circles, and including with human resources and with EDI. And there are some really good ideas about how we can think about making this a more structured process around all classifications in terms of professional development funding and opportunities.
Yeah, I think you and I have been involved in the discussion, so I think you've covered that quite well. Thank you, Luanna. Shall I move on to the stimulus funding, or is there other pieces?
Yeah, I think those are the ones that, let me see. What's the likelihood, here's one, what's the likelihood that students will end up taking on the brunt of the financial burden through tuition hikes? What do we know about tuition increases at this time?
There has not been a discussion of tuition increases. There has been a continued discussion that started even a couple of years back about the cohort tuition model. But in many cases, that actually could benefit our students. And so we have not had discussions about raising the tuition on regular basis. The cohort does have some built-in pieces on there with regular increases, but it's still a discussion item at this point. We're not looking at next year.
Okay.
Actually, I think in many ways we're taking stronger efforts to protect our students, and a lot of the aid that we're going to see on stimulus is supporting our students. So in many ways, I see us helping the students more than anything.
Right. I think that's good for now. I would go forward.
Great, thank you, Luanna, and please forward along any questions, Luanna, as we move forward. So what I do now is provide a little information about the stimulus funding that we received on the campus. There were 2 stimulus packages that have been coming out that support the universities and colleges. The first one was the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which is the CARES Act people are familiar with. which is enacted March 27th of 2020. It was basically to provide a lot of support for across the entire country. There's a piece of it that was helping to support higher education, which is about $30.75 billion. And it's to help support universities and colleges with response to the pandemic. Funding for each institution was split between financial aid and institutional support. The next slide I have actually gives you the numbers of what we have. There's another round of stimulus that was just recently passed on December 27th of 2020, which is the Coronavirus Response and Release Supplemental Appropriations Act. And there was a second round of funding to the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. This one was significantly larger at $81.88 billion. This again funds both financial aid and provides institutional support for the campus. What I'd like to do is actually provide some information about what money was actually used on our campus and what money we have available. Under the first stimulus, we received approximately $6.52 million for student support. This was provided via financial aid for our campus, 95% of that to undergraduate students and 5% to graduate students. There was another $6.52 million for institutional support. We used that in the spring to issue the student reimbursements for our housing and dining. Our housing and dining reimbursements exceeded about $10 million. So there were still some losses the campus incurred with those reimbursements, but that first stimulus did help defray a number of those costs. There was also another piece of money that we received on the first stimulus, which was the minority serving institution portion, which is about $965,000. About half of that has been used for financial aid, and the remainder of funds are to be determined. And we're strategizing on how to use those moving forward for the campus. Under the second stimulus, we received the same amount that we had from financial aid before, of the 6.52, and currently that is unallocated. And we received another amount of money for $13.7 million for institutional support. That is also unallocated. We literally just received these funds in the past week or two. So we're working on the strategies on how we'd like to use those to support the campus. The first group of the 6.52 will be used to support financial aid for the students. And the latter part will be for institutional support, which potentially can help defray some of the expenses that we're incurring on our campus right now as a result of the pandemic. We are still hopeful that there might be another MSI portion of the second stimulus, and also hopeful about a third stimulus package that's being discussed right now in the country that would provide even more money to institutions than what we're seeing here. What I'd like to do before we go into the discussion about where our payroll and some of our cost saving measures now is see if there's any questions about the stimulus funding.
I am not seeing any.
Okay.
Let me keep looking.
You can go ahead. Thank you, everybody.
Go ahead.
All right.
Oh, I mean, one of the questions is how are we going to communicate allocations?
That's a great question. I think before we really didn't issue much of a communication. So I think that we need to work on doing that moving forward. So as we develop more strategies for this, we'll have to commit to messaging this to the campus on how we're using those funds, because I'm not sure we actually have fully mentioned this to the campus publicly. So thank you for the suggestion.
Okay, I think we go on.
Thank you. So what we want to talk about now are the fiscal conservation measures that we were discussing with the campus in the last town hall. This is actually the same slide from the last town hall that we had. Sort of outlines different things we've done for the campus, starting with the hold on backfills, going into the procurement constraints we put on our systems to control procurement, then talking about the 5% targeted reductions that we were looking at the divisional level across the campus, with the additional 7 for next year. And what's new with this slide is the message that came out from the chancellor, which announced that we were not going to utilize the salary and time saving programs for the campus at that time. And another message that came from myself that was announcing sort of the need to continue to look at our cost saving measures moving forward so that we can continue to save money and help put our employees first in the context of saving other additional funds we need to. Now, what I'd like to do is provide you some information that's sort of an update from what we had before. On the position control side, we've have had significant savings. These on the left are the savings we've had by not backfilling positions starting from April 1st when we put in the position control through December. First period from April to June, there was about 1.3 million, an additional 1.2 from July through the end of December. Which is about $2.6 million in savings from not filling backfill positions. This is the delays that we put on the 6 months for those people, that positions we were not filling. There's also exceptions that we're looking at, or the positions exception process. This would be requests that came forward either for new hires, maybe renewals of contracts, maybe exceptions to the policies, other things we're looking at for the position controls. And we've saved probably about $837,000, $840,000 under that process as well. So the position control savings have been significant for the campus, and are helping the campus with meeting some of our cost saving goals. The other thing I'd like to do is provide an update on our payroll forecast. We provided this again in the last town hall. And just to remind everybody, to give you an idea of what each of the lines represent, the blue line at the very top is the amount of payroll that we budget on our campus. This would be what we're budgeting out to each of the divisions. The dashed blue line at the bottom, this is actually the best way of thinking about it, is the sort of revenues we have to support those allocations. The difference between those is what I was referring to as a structural deficit in the prior presentation. So that is roughly the $23 million, which means we've over budgeted about $23 million in our payroll relative to the revenues we have to support it. Now, the orange line that we're looking at here, which is just below the blue, is what the current forecast is for our payroll expenses this year, which is roughly $216 million. So there is some savings there from what we are relative to our budget. Now, the yellow line is the dotted one is actually showing you what our forecast model would have predicted at this current point in time moving forward. And the yellow line indicates what our actual payroll was last year for the campus. So as we can see, the payroll's gone up about $10 million from 206 million to 216. Oops, pardon me. Now, many of you had requested to sort of see where is that extra money going. Well, right here is actually a campus-wide depiction of where our money is flowing on our campus. We are looking at what the spend was last year, which is the far left, which is the spend for fiscal year 20, which is the academic year 2019-2020 by division. And actually, this is the figure we bring forward to every division across campus. And we've been doing it for 3 months now. We show them their expenditures. We show them what they were a year ago. We show them what the 5% targeted reductions is, which is the purple column over the third one over. And then we show them the budgets, what they are year to date on their actuals, what the difference in those actuals are, and how they are relative to our targets for the campus on the 5% targeted reductions at the divisional level. Things I'd like to really highlight for you are the two blue circles. So look at the first one to the left. This means that year to date December, we spent about $124.12 million on our payroll. Today, we are currently at 125.6, 125.7. So it's gone up roughly $1.5 million year to date. That's how much our expenses have gone up. That's right. I said payroll, what I mean is total expenses. I apologize for that. So total expenses have gone up about 1.5 million. Majority of this is in salary and benefits. We have had some savings with supplies and other pieces, non-travel, other pieces across the campus, but most of the increase is coming off the payroll. The only thing we would note is that there's some favorability that's being shown in student affairs, and that's because we have yet to make our health insurance payment to the Office of the President, which is about $2.9 million. So you might want to keep in mind that that is an additional expense that we'll be having to bring forth, which is a normal expense we make every year. Now on the far right, you'll see the red circle, and it's going to go around and show $7.7 million. What that means is that as a campus at large, we're spending $7.71 million more than what we are targeting on the 5% reduction. And what you can see are areas on the campus where if you see anything in a bracket, that would mean it's higher expenses. So it's to the negative relative to a target. So you see where the additional expenses are in those brackets. And if you look across, you'll see where a lot of the extra salary saving or salary expenses are. The key areas that have been are usually on the faculty hiring within the schools. There's also been significant hiring within the Division of Finance and Administration with regard to the Alpha Financials project. And we've had a little bit of hiring also within the Office of the Research. We will have this PowerPoint available so you can look at the details of what these numbers are across the campus, but it'll give you some depiction about where the money is flowing in based on the hiring decisions we made last year, many of that being done prior to the pandemic. And the other thing I'd like to do is provide an update on the annual targets by organization. This is the waterfall graph that we provided before. And what we see on the far left is what were the opening balance of what we had spent a year ago. So That was 255 million. This is excluding financial aid, contracts and grants, endowments and fees and auxiliaries. So it's a smaller portion of the money. And then what we see on the far right is actually what the 5% reduction would look like. Year ago, we are at 255. We'd like to be at 242 at the end of the year. Now, if we applied the 5% reduction across each of the divisions, the waterfall graph would show you roughly how it would fall for each of the divisions. So this would mean, for instance, the chancellor organization would be about $300,000 in savings. Going across, you'd see Shaw about 2 million, student affairs about 1.8, PUPD about 1.7. This is how the 5%, if it was equally split across the different divisions, how it would manifest itself within savings. So just to reiterate, sorry about that. The far left is what we were a year ago. I mean, the entire year. 242 is what we're looking at for this year. I'd like to show you where we are relative to these goals. And this is year to date. If we look at expenses just year to date, which is through the end of December, we would have 124 million that we have spent. That was a year ago on the far left. We would have targeted spending 118 million. So just on our year-to-date expenditures, we would expect to have about the 6 million reduction in there. What we can see are the reds and greens. A red is basically an expense beyond the target for the division, which raises the bar up. A green is an expenditure below their target, meaning they're saving additional money for the campus that brings it back down. And then you can see it across each of the divisions. And the orange is the gap year to date. That's the $7.71 million that were shown in the chart just a few minutes ago. So looking across the divisions, you can see how different divisions are either above their target or below their target. One thing again to remind ourselves is that the 3.3 savings that we see in student affairs has not actually accounted for the 2.9 million that is coming out of the health insurance from the Office of the President. So that actually would be an additional expense moving forward. I'll give you some time to look at this. You can see how roughly different divisions are contributing to the savings that we have for the 5% targets.
So Kurt, we have
Questions?
We have a few questions. DFA, let's see, the 8 million additional to DFA.
That is not what we're showing. The addition to DFA was, no, that's, let me see what we're looking at. So the December year-to-date expenses for DFA was 9.1. Where we are currently right now is 10.8. So actually from year-to-date, there's only an increase of about 1.8. Or sorry, 1.7 is what the number is over there. So if you look at this figure and look at the second column from the right, you will see the year-to-date spend versus the prior year. So you can actually see how much you're spending more relative to the prior year. So DF&A currently will have spent 1.68 million more than what they spent year-to-date a year ago. Hopefully that addresses that question. So I'll leave it on this just in case there are other questions. You can see how different divisions across the campus either have under or over expenditures relative to the prior year.
And then we have a question about, does the figure include the high cost of consultants? Won't this cost be reduced going forward? I'm not sure which figure it's related to.
Yeah, I would have to confirm. I believe the consulting fees were in this piece in here that we have, and we have not isolated that in any particular way to see whether or not what that particular saving is across the consulting. I know that that is contracted significantly, but I do not have the numbers on that. That's something we could look at for our upcoming presentations.
Okay. Let's see. If the deficit was created by approved hires between 2019 and 2020, how would a department decrease expenses related to those hires now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's hard to do that, really. I mean, those are hires that were made before. I think when we're in those situations, and every discussion that we've had with the different divisions, this comes up. It's hard because 2/3 of our expenses are payroll, right? And so if we're trying to reduce it, we have to either potentially think about some backfill positions we're not going to fill, where there's maybe going to be delays in some other hires that we're looking at making. That's how we save some of those salaries. We're still remaining committed to our employees. So we want to keep the employees. And so we have to find those savings in other locations. And I think what I'm also hearing with that question is, Well, we made the decision before the pandemic, right? And like we have to understand that that's a decision we've made. We now have to live with that. That's okay. What we have to think about is how are we moving forward? And part of this is financial transparency, so you can see what we are spending. We didn't know this a year ago. Like, we really did not know where we were spending across the campus in this way. So this is really my mark, just sort of a transparency exercise here, not saying that, by the way, we have to go cut in some other places. This is just transparency.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it goes, an anonymous question was, could we have units stick to a strict budget and not spend money they don't have? I mean, I think going forward, that's
Yeah, actually, that's going to be addressed in one of the upcoming slides. So we actually are going to be talking about the potential for there being some harder controls on budgets for the upcoming year. So it's an excellent question. It's on a future slide. So thank you for bringing that up. Other questions? Good. Okay. So the other thing I'd like to do is just give you a broad overview of our general financial status. This is a projection. So based on where we are today, we projected out some of the revenues and expenses for the duration of the year. This would be that fiscal year, so it would be closing at the end of June. On the general campus, we're looking at expected revenues about $30.6 million, with expected expenditures about 305.5, around there. We're also having debt of about 42.7, so the net is a deficit of about 47.6. On auxiliaries, which is where we have housing, dining, transportation, and the ECEC, and I should point out a majority of this is housing and dining. That's where most of the revenues and expenditures will be flowing. We see expected revenues this year of about $7.8, $7.9 million, and expected expenditures about 18.2. The debt within auxiliaries is about 51.5, and the net is a deficit of about 61.83. In totality, we're looking at about 109.43 in sort of the deficit for the campus. There's a couple things I'd like to note with this. First of all, auxiliaries with the revenues of 7.8 million. This is significantly lower than what we would normally have on our campus. We could easily see our revenues within auxiliaries to be approaching the 70 million mark. The expenses will go up as well, but we would have net returns potentially around the 40 million range from the auxiliaries. So that is a significant difference from our campus operations, and it has impacted us financially. The other thing to remember is that from the prior presentation, we had the owner cost payments. There's an owner cost payment of about $38 million we made this year. That's the last time we have to make that payment. It was for final delivery of the 2020. That's embedded both in the debt that we see on the general campus and auxiliaries. Moving forward, the general debt we're looking at is about 65 million, which is what we talked about in our last presentation. So I guess what I'm trying to tell you is that we knew there was going to be these large expenses this year. We just didn't know the pandemic was going to make it a little more difficult for us. The revenues that we were expecting were not coming at the same time. The other thing to think about is that there is the stimulus money, which is the money that we receive from the institution. That will hopefully defray some of these costs, but it's also important to be thinking about the relative magnitudes. We have about 109 we're looking at, and there's about 13.6 or 13.7 of the institutional pieces for the year. There still is a fair amount of money that we're going to have to either come through cost savings or through loans to bridge across this gap. So what does this mean for future
Sure.
direction?
Can I pause there, please, for one moment? There were some questions that came in a little bit later after you finished the talking about the stimulus. So how will the prioritization work for the new stimulus funds? You know, where will we spend that? How will it be prioritized? And does any of that require repayment? Those are a couple questions that came across.
So we have not put it in the process for the discussion on how we're looking at that. There's a group leading the financial aid portion, and that's being led predominantly through student affairs about how we're going to have strategies looking at how we'll look at the financial aid portion. We have yet to have discussions about the institutional support piece. We will be having those discussions at the cabinet level with the chancellor and the other leadership across campus to figure out how we would best utilize those funds. Those discussions, we haven't really started those today because funds have just recently been acquired in the past couple of weeks. I would anticipate that as we get more clarity about that, we'll bring that information to the campus. But with the financial aid portion, there's a group working on strategies already. Vice Chancellor Charles Neese and their group is working in that area. So that's the best I could provide at this time.
Great, thank you.
I see other questions rolling in, but is that good or?
Yeah, I mean, there's several of them. Let's maybe we'll get through it and then go back.
Almost done. So we can almost done, and we can get to a bigger group, and that'll be good. All right. So what does it mean for future directions? One thing I've been really trying to bring out to the group is that our financial situation is not happening to us, it's happening with us. We're really part of this process and part of the solution as well. The other thing I'd like to point is that our current cost saving measures are not sufficient to meet our campus targets. We are going to need to begin to plan for the upcoming fiscal year cost reductions. Additional cost saving measures we may be necessary for the campus is to continue reduction in non-salary expenditures. It's difficult. We will also be having to consider continuing position control efforts. This includes holding vacancies, oversights of contracts, and reducing new hiring. We will also need to be considering some adjustments to budgets for the upcoming fiscal year, much into the question that came before. And we will need to revisit the salary and time saving programs for the campus. Now, it's being said, there's a lot of uncertainty around here. There's a lot of things that are still unknown. We still need to be thinking about what our enrollments are going to be looking like for the upcoming year. What is the stimulus going to be looking like moving forward? What's going to be the penetration of vaccination rates that will affect our ability to house students? These are all things that will affect the bottom line of our finances moving forward. So we need to thoughtfully move through those and also look at other efforts we can, perhaps debt restructuring, other things for the campus that are ways to help protect the campus moving forward. Another thing to point out, and it was best said by President Drake, you can't cut your way to excellence. We must still continue to make strategic investments that align with our campus financial needs. Although we do have to engage in cost-saving measures, we do need to make strategic investments to continue into the future. We're going to grow ourselves through this, and we're going to thrive at the end of it, but we have to be strategic in what those decisions are. Areas that might be very important right now are things like enrollment support, retention, marketing, and focal research areas. We can't lose sight of this. We have to think about where we're going. So one future consideration I'd like to point out, I just want to point out that our financial situation is very simple. I mean, in my mind, it really boils down to increasing our undergraduate enrollment. It's a very simple thing for us. Most of our revenue sources come from enrollment. So to that end, I'd say that enrollment must be viewed as a campus responsibility. Retention, supporting those students we have, keeping them on our campus, and ensuring they're successful must be viewed as a campus responsibility. This all ties to our aspirations for R1. This all helps provide the resources to achieve that goal. We need these resources to help support that goal. Continued growth is going to help us thrive into the future. Now, there is some light here. We'd like to point out that our current applications are about 30,150 students. It's the highest to date. I imagine it's probably a little bit higher. Some people probably in student affairs are telling me it's a little bit higher than this right now. It's about a 5% increase from first years, about 20% increase on transfers. Massive increase on transfers. It's great. We're going to need to continue this effort, continue to expand our enrollment, and continue to thrive moving forward in this way. We're also going to need to work on expanding our revenue sources for the campus through philanthropy, contracts and grants, doing some extension work, using the conference center. We have to be creative about diversifying our revenue streams on this campus. So to wrap it up, thank you all for joining us. We're going to continue this dialogue both 2 more times, March 26th and April 30th. I hope that you're going to join. And at this point, I'd like to open up the floor for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Kurt. So, there's lots of questions coming in around enrollment, right? So it's one of our biggest revenue streams. How can we increase, oh gosh, questions are coming in, they're losing them. How can we increase undergraduate enrollment when we will most likely need to restrict the new faculty and staff hires to support these efforts? Oh, are you muted?
I didn't do that. It did to me automatically. Okay. That's a really good question. I think a couple of ways I'd like to think about from this perspective is that one thing we need to be thinking about on the enrollment side is we need to be thinking about increasing yield. So doing yield efforts and thinking about it from that perspective of how we get those applicants to want to be on our campus is a really important thing today. Focusing on yield will increase our financial base and support our campus amazingly. The other question about the faculty and staff piece. One thing I'd like to point out is that I will be honest and say, I think on the staff, we are thin. I think from what we've seen in those responses, Luanna, it's very clear to me that the staff are pushed very hard right now.
Yeah.
I really hope that we as a campus support them and understand that. But on the faculty side, one thing I would like to point out, oops. But on the faculty side, the one thing I like to point out is that we hired a fair number of faculty last year. Over 40 some faculty, 40, and some of them are coming in over the next year or so. And so we have built capacity. We have a fair amount of capacity for additional enrollment growth. There's some statistics I've looked at before that we've roughly added about 68 faculty over the past 3 years and about 12 students per those faculty. We've added additional faculty to build in capacity for this growth. So I think in many ways we have that ability and we can grow programs to support the campus. So I think it's an important thing to think about on the faculty side. The numbers, we have the faculty to get to the 10,000 students and probably a little bit beyond. When we start growing beyond that, we probably will still feel some pains, but we have a little bit of a cushion for a little bit of time. And I'm sure there will be needs along the way to help support key areas across the campus.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions, concerns, of course, about kind of this untenable situation in many ways that we're in, where we increase faculty, we're trying to bring back students, and we don't have enough staff to support them, and morale is bad, and people are overworked and getting burnout. So some of the questions, just paraphrasing here, are around, how are we going, what's our plan for potentially ramping back up in terms of allowing for more backfills, more key positions to go forward? How does that comport with our financial situation? So, I mean, you and we've talked about this a lot. Chancellor's given direction. We've talked about this with leadership, with HR, and we are looking at the workforce plans that we've developed in the past, what we need currently, how that's going to interface with potential budget targets for divisions, and reduction targets in personnel costs that we need to employ and we need to see people held accountable to, and giving them more flexibility, and looking at those things that have been paused, the stipends, the stars, the equity, the reclasses, things that reward folks for doing a lot more. And they've been asked to do a lot more. So we are looking at a phased approach where we look at those that were paused. We also go out to division leads and ask what has changed in the last year, because the priorities that were paused or were our reality a year ago may not be our reality right now, and in light of budget targets. So we are developing a process for that, and I'm just sorry we can't give more definitive hope, but there is hope, and we hear all of these concerns, because it's something we do have to move this forward.
Yeah, no, agreed, Luanna. And it's something we've talked about, and actually we've talked about it in joint council and cabinet in different pieces, where we need to do some assessments about critical areas of need for exactly what you're talking about, because this has been going on for a year.
Yeah.
And
we had no way of knowing, this is something, we didn't know this was going to happen. We're all trying to do the best we can with what we have.
Yeah, the only thing I would mention is that when we originally were dealing with this in the spring, we identified some key principles to guide our financial decisions. And I think those are really important things to keep in mind as we answer these questions, which we looked at supporting our instruction, right? Making sure we're keeping the continuity of instruction moving forward, trying to find ways to get people back to doing research because of what we had in those pieces. And the third one was people first. We wanted to put our employees first. So when we're thinking about the backfills, we need to really understand that. So if we're cost savings, we want to make sure that we're not doing backfills or new hires that in any ways compromises also our existing employees. So, I mean, these are the trade-offs that we have to be thinking about and making. And I'm not saying we have an answer right now, but we need to stay true to those principles as well as we're thinking about it.
Yep. Go ahead. I'm just looking at some of the questions.
I don't know if I can look at the Q&A, but.
There were some questions about auxiliaries. What are auxiliary projections on site with respect to student housing occupancy for the next fiscal year? And this goes along with a few other questions around our enrollment target. So both of those are revenue generation. So
Sure.
what do we expect? How do we expect our enrollment to grow? I know you touched on it with respect to the public health situation, but
I've got a few numbers that I could reference in this context. So I think if we're able to be vaccinated and have sufficient support to come back to campus and to think about resuming, we probably would have some health restrictions we'd have to have, but we have talked about, bringing in a fair number. But if you, at one time or another, we had over 4,000 people on campus, right? And at that time, we had about 74 million in revenues and auxiliaries. As we move down and contract from that, it reduces those revenues. If we were in the 3,000s, it would be 50 to 60 million range. So as we start seeing what we're capable of doing from a health standards perspective, we'll be able to increase that. But we have to do what we can safely, right? I mean, that is first and foremost. And so if we are able to bring people back, it will support that. It's just.
yeah, because right now, for example, the IHE, Institutions of Higher Education guidelines from the state, I believe they only allow us to be at about 1,500 max occupancy in singles in the dorms on campus living. So if those are relaxed, remember we start in mid-August, so it kind of depends on if those get relaxed or not. Then I suspect we'd have more leeway. Is that you're thinking?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say, but we have to stay to those standards. I mean, the IHE, we only have, I think, around 500 people on campus right now.
Yeah.
And that's what's really associated with some of the revenue sources we have at this time. So 1,500 would allow more, but it's still not our normal operations. The auxiliaries is definitely a high density sort of model, and with any institution, but we won't be able to, we have to wait for the health standards to allow us to be to that point and to protect our students. And faculty, we're also working with students at the same time. Staff.
So there's let's see, what amount that there were some questions around growth and debt, using debt to grow, and then also what amount of debt are we willing to carry forward? So what's our tolerance?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Why can't we just borrow and keep growing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So let me provide a little information about what our cash kind of looks like for the campus, and that might provide some context about where we're willing to kind of think about moving forward. So we have our balances that they're called stip and trip, but let's call them cash balances we have for the campus. And we'd roughly 220 million around there. It's gone down a little bit recently with some of the debt pieces we've had in payroll expenses. Actually, of that amount, 100 million is already a loan from OP. There's another debt instrument that we have from Office of the President that was helped to bridge some gaps, given that we knew where we were going to be today, like before we even had the pandemic, which was about 55 million. There's a little bit more than that was provided for some other investments for the campus. So that's really the pool of money we're talking about. Let's say it's around the 270, 280 range. 110 million or 90 million is a significant portion of that money. So we can't really look at spreading all of that across in an extended period of time. Most of these debt instruments are going to be 6 or 7 years, maybe 8 years. So, and the thing you have to remember is you're paying on that, right? So we need to have the projected growth and enrollment to pay the debt that we're using to cover the debt we have. So we have to be fairly cautious about what we actually spread out, because there might be, when we spread more out, we're putting more pressure on the enrollment. And we have to be understanding that there's that trade-off that we're making. We will be spreading out some of this. That's why we have the debt instruments. We will do that, and we need to do that. But we're also going to need to continue the cost savings, because we can't spread it out all the way.
Well, there's kind of a related question, which I think is a really good one. How does increasing our undergraduate enrollment really help us financially if we rely on the state to fund our financial aid program?
It's a good question. So we actually, our state appropriations is directly relinked. So we aren't part of the rebenching right now, but for rebenching in the system that you see, which is part of this, state appropriations actually formulaically from enrollment. So if you have higher enrollment, there are larger state appropriations that flow. Now there is a little bit of, there's the pool of money that goes to the Office of the President that then goes to the campuses. So it's within that pool. But if we have higher enrollment within that pool, we will get more of that state appropriations. That's one piece that helps grow the revenues. The other side is the tuition itself. So the tuition that we receive, we have a return to aid that's a third of that, which goes into the financial aid pool, and then 2/3 of it that comes for the campus revenues. So it is actually a revenue source, both through the state appropriation side as well as through the tuition side. And the financial aid will be coming in through the return to aid. What we get through Pell Grants or other pieces to cover that is additional revenue, is supporting those costs in many ways. So it is additional revenue for the campus.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hopefully that's clear. But yes, if there aren't, please let me know.
Let's see. Are we considering what is at risk, mental health, physical health, burnout, in pushing to get to R1 in this current context? I believe in you, Merced, but I also want growth to happen in a way that is sustainable.
Wow, that's a great question. Yes, we are. I mean, Luanna, our groups have many discussions. This has come to our attention in many contexts. Actually, a researcher in public health has recently done some work looking at this, student mental health. This has been definitely on our radar and how we try to improve that. I think we're seeing it everywhere across the campus, if we're honest. And so it's definitely something that we need to work on and support everybody and help each other. Anything you want to add from an HR perspective, Luanna?
Yeah, no, I mean, we have to be, we can only do so much, and people first, we have to care for our people and each other, ourselves and each other. And while we need to have these goals, we need to have our strategic plan, our markers for 3, 5, 10 out, and we need to know where we're going. But we can't kill ourselves and in the meantime.
Very much agreed. Yes. Yeah.
Another question is, will we get to 10,000 students this year?
So we actually, if you look at our prior enrollment, I think it was the fall of 17, which is a class that's rolling out, was one of our highest enrollment classes, and they're rolling out this year. So it'll be difficult to get to 10,000. I don't actually see that happening, to be frankly honest. If we do very good with our yield on those 30,000 applicants, we could keep above the 9,000 marks. But we have a really large cohort that rolled out because they're graduating, which is great. And that's great for our student success and the students we serve, but we need to replace that into the pool. So I do not see us getting to 10,000 this year.
Okay. Another question, I understand that new hires must be held, but what about units that have lost faculty due to either retirement, movement elsewhere, or other? There are units that are producing massive undergraduate yields that are at risk of falling behind.
That's a great question. And I think, it's something that I'd have to talk with the provost about. And this is an academic affairs component for this. And there have been a few hires that we've had to make this year because of some similar types of situations. And I think that'd be something we need to talk with the provost about, figuring out what those critical needs are and analyze from that perspective. This is part of the, you can't cut your way to excellence part that President Drake said, right? There's some things we will have to do as we're cutting costs.
Yeah, and can you speak a little bit? One of the folks that are writing in would like you to speak a little bit to making clear that grants, graduate students, and research are all rather net negative cash flows for our campus, and that positive, can you focus on what are the positive ways that that we're going to see some revenue generation?
Yeah, I think to take it as let's not think of grad students and things as negative. It's a mission aligned investment. We're an academic institution, we're a university. Those are things we need to be doing if we are a university, right? I just want to put that up front. That's mission aligned, and we need to continue to support those people and those grad students. When we're talking about the revenue source, we do tend to predominantly focus on the undergrads because the grad students are supported through TA-ships and stipends and things that they receive in many cases for either being on grants or being on other pieces. And also, I think if you look at grants, the topic comes out about whether or not that is the net negative. We do have indirect costs that we charge on grants. It's about 55%. Our effective rate on that is about 20%, which means that every dollar that we charge on a grant, we charge an extra 55 cents to support it. Our effective rate is actually about 22, 23 cents, which means we're actually through other agreements only getting about 22 or 23 cents for that dollar. The campus cost is higher than that. But again, it's back to that mission aligned piece. These are investments that we make as an institution to be a university. Going back to the R1 piece, we have to make those investments to move toward the R1, but that's part of the trade-off we're making. This is it. The finances for the campus, it's all related. They're all intertwined and all tied toward the mission. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, it does. And I agree with you. So another good question is, what's the budget? This came up in some of the survey results that folks responded to and that we analyzed around how people feel that they're saving personally for cost saving at home by working at home, and then how the campus can continue cost savings. What's the budget savings on overhead and operational costs if the campus allows employees who are not required to be on campus to remain telecommuting? Eliminating lease space, utilities, operational costs must account for some type of savings.
Yeah, I don't have the precise numbers on that, to be honest. I did look at some of the savings that we had in the areas of sort of supplies and expenses for the campus, utilities, and some of the travel piece. And it's over $1 million in $1 million each for sort of this travel piece, as well as some of the supplies expenses. We still are having to have the, support the buildings because the buildings are there, right? So there are those utility costs in some cases, but it isn't at the savings are not at the scale of that 109 million that we're talking about, right? They are in the smaller digits in the millions, so they're tangible, but they aren't at the higher levels that we had experienced in that context. So we still are paying for running a campus. That's something to keep in mind. As far as the telecommuting pieces and the savings, I think we've had some discussions about what that might look like going forward. We have not put any dollars to that to figure out what those savings would be at this juncture. I think a lot of that is actually thinking about serving the staff and faculty, meeting them with their needs and where they want to be as well.
Yep.
We only have about 3 minutes. Do we want to?
We do, and I'd like to give, if you don't mind, I'd like to give Chancellor the last word.
Exactly what I was going to ask, to see if the Chancellor wanted to conclude with anything.
Okay. Anyway, appreciate you all being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Chancellor Munoz now.
Thank you again, Luanna, and thank you to our colleague Kurt, and thank you to all who participated in today's event, as well as the very thoughtful questions that you've put to all of us. I've been listening very carefully and taking notes, and as you all now realize that these are not uncomplicated issues, but I am very optimistic about our pathway forward. And the point that I'd like to emphasize that Dr. Schnier shared with us is that these are all interrelated, the finances across the campus, and that these are things that are not being done to us exclusively, and that we can work together to extricate ourselves from the situation and put us on the path that I think all of us want to be on as a university and as a community. I believe that there are some temporary challenges and difficulties that we have to understand affect different parts of the campus differently. We have to ensure parity, equity, and transparency. And I hope that you find these kinds of conversations and this very frank sharing of our situations part of that new effort to be transparent and forthcoming. And as we move out of this situation and onto better financial footing and to what I believe, I hope you all believe, will be an immensely prosperous future for the University of California, Merced. But that prosperity doesn't occur without all of you. And so again, I want to thank you, and I hope you and your families remain safe and well, and I look forward to when we're all back on campus together. Thank you again, Luanna and Kurt, for your wonderful leadership, as well as everyone else that contributed to this event.
Thank you, Chancellor. And thank
you
all for participating.
Yeah, thank you all for joining as well. Bye-bye.